I was delighted to be joined this week via Zoom by Matt Potter, 07 Vestur's newest recruit, and he gave a great interview about the insight of swapping Suffolk for Surveyor in his big move. Now, at this point, I must offer an apology. The news reported that Matt had been given the manager's role at 07 Vestur, and this was backed up by the always reliable Wikipedia and some Twitter feeds, but in fact, no. Some news has been lost in translation somewhere, and Matt is actually the new head of youth at 07 Vestur. So it's not an interview with a first team manager, but it is an interview with an important member of backroom staff taking up the reins at a top flight Faroese club. And I talked to him about how he got such a job, what his history is, what the team means to the community, and what working with the board is like. It's a great interview. He's very enthusiastic about the league and has already offered to come back for a catch-up interview a few months down the line, so I am forever grateful to him for coming on the channel. I hope you enjoy the chat. Tell us a bit about your coaching career to date.
I began coaching probably when I was about 18. Unfortunately, I was released from Stevenage at the time after having high hopes and dreams and sort of having them sort of taken away. But I still had the sort of presence of mind to get involved in coaching. Probably something I recognised probably from about 14, 15, even from fantasy football and the way I used to sort of watch games. I knew that I had sort of obviously a deep affection and love for the game. So around about 18, I did my level 2, which is sort of the UEFA C. And I've been coaching ever since at various levels through either in community or professional clubs, a la Norwich, Colchester. And I worked for the FA as a skills coach, specifically as a so-called specialist between 5 and 11, but also was a tutor or a Salama tutor from sort of the low level of level 1, to start beginner to UEFA B, and as well as tutoring futsal as well. So across those years, been on trips to the likes of China, the States, Sweden, and obviously tutoring around the country here, along with some fantastic educators who I've learned a lot from along the way. In the senior game, I've coached at a local club, Lowestoft Town, who play in the Southern League here, and who at the time were in the National League North. And also another club called Galston, who are a couple of divisions below that, in sort of your local and national competitions within that for sort of 3 years before I then made the move to Colchester.
How did this opportunity come about? Did you approach them or did they come for you?
It was a bit of both. They came from me. That I was recommended by a colleague, a gentleman called Teddy Moen, who's in Norway. He's a very nice chap and a very good person to be connected and support you. And we'd struck up a relationship probably for the last 9 or so months. And he contacted me, I think one random Friday afternoon, and mentioned about this club and the role. Would it be something I'd be interested in? And if so, he would happily recommend me, and based on our conversations and what we knew of each other, and thereafter he did. And then I had a conversation with one of the other officials at the club, the first team manager, who'd just taken over himself, who spoken to me for us to a fair bit of time on the phone. Bear in mind we didn't know each other, and then therefore recommended me. I then had a conversation, sort of an interview, if you like, with the board, who were then very positive around the information and how I presented myself to them. And then, more or less within a day or two, they then offered me the role.
What are your first impressions of the board and the club?
They were the most important people, I think, in this process, because it was nice to hear people who genuinely had an affection and affinity towards their club, what they do, the passion yet humility they spoke of, which isn't always, and I think I can say this, isn't always the way you're made to feel in our society, shall we say. There's a very much a deeper feeling and connection towards the person, and understanding them. And it was a lot of the questions in the actual sort of conversation interview were around me, the person who I am, the background, and how I would deal with certain situations, or how I would look to implement certain ideas that was either asked by themselves or led by myself. I'm not in the Faroe Islands yet, but I've had good conversations with sort of the close staff members, in particular one gentleman who's been very helpful to me, Johan, who's part of the youth board, and I've obviously had conversations with the first team head coach, and when I'm due to actually do maybe an evening video call such as the cell like this, and also when I arrive, potentially do sort of a meet and greet and have a conversation with the obviously the children players, other older players, and coaches, staff of the club.
Was it an easy decision to relocate?
It's not been an easy one, just generally because you're sort of taking everything into context, with family here, personal scenarios, you know, your closest sort of family, your partner, your children, your mum and dad, they, you know, and your friends, and that in itself is a big enough decision. But I figured, what would I have to really lose as such? Because I want to, you know, you're learning somewhere to be somewhere different. I'd actually, a few months back, started learning Norwegian in preparation for a potential role. And I figured that actually I've got to try and make the use of the time as we had it in terms of Corona and how the world's been affected, of trying to still keep yourself sort of in the loop, which has then obviously led on to finding out more about the club, finding out as much as I can about Faroese football, but also I still want to have that element of finding out it myself, rather than the more obviously educated opinions. But I think it's still quite nice to have that element of surprise or element of learning for your own self as well.
There's one other English manager in the Faroe Islands, Richard Gooch at B71 Sandoy. Did you have any talks with him about the league before you moved?
I actually spoke with Richard the back end of last year, and he was talking to me about the Faroes, as I was doing sort of a lot of research into the different countries and speaking to people like that, because I thought actually it's a no-brainer. Why would I not lean on people's experience and learn from them? And yeah, I've spoken to Richard, and he was talking to me about, you know, the lifestyle and the culture, which obviously is a huge thing to understand and recognise. And you probably probably won't do that until I actually get to the Faroes. Is, you know, how the way people live and how they think about football. And with that, you know, the information that I gained from him and the information I've learned since, it's you know, been quite an open book, shall I say, or as the way I interpret it. So it's something to look forward to and to really sort of immerse yourself in. I don't think you can go to a country of any place and not put yourself out and make yourself, because at the end of the day, you're in their culture. You should be leaning towards them because, you know, they've been kind enough to take you in as such. You know, why would you not?
What are your ambitions for the club, both short and long term, and are these visions shared by the board?
The ambitions is trying to look at it, I suppose, from a short, medium and long term. Obviously, I need to find my feet first, which I think is going to take some time, in the sense of I want to really immerse and understand the needs of the club, but also from a more holistic view of not just the board, which are you know, hugely important, but also the people of the club, the coaches, the parents and the players, and try and find the best product and program that's going to work for them, the community and the club. And I really want to try and get on side immediately with that, and understanding that it's not just the professional side, it's very much the personal touch, the personal feel of understanding them, again, the culture and how we could probably look to utilize some ideas that they have, because I think it's important that there's probably a lot more knowledge looking at me than is actually looking at them. And I'd be probably quite foolish and naive not to try and tap into that. I'm also acutely aware that some decisions that are made or may take some time to adjust to, or they might not necessarily be in agreement, but actually we all agree in one thing, is that we want to try and take the club and the youth department and the connection and the pathway to the first team forward. But like I said, I think it's a club that wants to really develop, a club that wants to make the most of its resources. And hopefully, I think that's been suggested by actually, employing myself when they could have probably employed, from what I know, more local, more understanding people of the culture and coaches from Denmark, I believe. So, I think that's shown a positive step and something that they would like that maybe is slightly different to the view that they've been currently having. So that's a compliment to myself, and again, a boost of confidence, and something I would like to repay and how I can.
Do you have a message for 07 Vestur fans?
I'm looking forward to meeting the community, the fans, the coaches, obviously the players, very importantly, because that's the next production support network to moving forward in the pathway. I'm looking forward to hearing their thoughts on football, but not just football, life, because I think it's important to respect and understand everyone else's point of view, and hopefully that I can bring something that's different or exciting, and something that has a positivity towards not just the club, but also to maybe Faroese football as a whole.
I also asked some questions pitched by you, the Faroe Ball community audience. I picked out a couple of my favourites. What steps could be taken to take Faroese league football as a whole to the next level?
I think it's a very delicate subject from what I've understood from Scandinavia as a whole, based on societal beliefs. Within the Faroese football, I think, from what I would gather, is really trying to find out where the support is needed. I wouldn't like to put my finger on and say this is what it needs to happen, because I'd be remiss to say that and not be there and not experience it. But I think it's very much having an open dialogue and recognising that actually Faroese football, although I believe ranked 114th in the world, per capita is the largest participation sport in the world in terms of playing football. I think it's around about 60% of the population, I think, are engaged with football or have played, from what I read. Now, I could be wrong about that, but in a sense of a country that's 53,000, I think, across 18 islands, that I live in a town, and it's a small town in England, that has 70-odd thousand. So, and they don't play international football. So there is definitely some really good things that are going on. I think it would be the excitement and the intrigue around working with the club and then the federation to see how that could potentially then still evolve, but not neglecting or leaving behind any of the cultural or societal connections that it has with one another. I think it's more around, it could be small evolution and evolvement rather than a revolution, because I think it's actually really important to recognise the journey that Faroese football and with the international and clubs that have been doing well in Europe, again, really punching above their weight and pound for pound are really strong, that it's very much a case of keep pushing on, maybe looking at different angles to maximise the resources and what you have at your disposal.
Should Faroese teams improve their online presence and sell kits abroad, for example?
I think there's always gaps around. You see some people that are fantastic at selling, promoting a product. I think that would naturally take its course if I was part of a process, or we as a group of coaches that are really trying to push for players to be more exposed and more exposure in terms of leagues, and how people could connect to those leagues in terms of streaming, and maybe a lot of an online presence in terms of shouting loud on your Facebooks, your Twitters, your Instagrams, and all those other mediums, because they are the connection to people. There's people who live their entire lives through social media, so which that's another conversation for another time, but that's very important, because the connection with people who you would never believe you would even speak to is very, very possible. And aesthetically, you look at the kits, you look at colours, people have suddenly become quite, have an affection. And from what I gather, that the Faroe Islands is a huge tourist destination, which I wasn't even aware of probably until a week or two ago. So those promotions in terms of shops online, I think everyone else shouts loud. Why shouldn't the Faroe Islands, for people to do that, I think that's hugely key. And again, it's finding the people, and I'm sure there's absolute, expertise out there that would love to support, whether that's in the Faroe Islands or similar countries, or again, people that, like yourself, who have a real strong advocation of the league, of the game, of the country, and that can only grow. So, props to those people and yourself.
Will you be looking locally for talent, or look at bringing British players over?
Well, within my remit, I think it would obviously be the young talent. Now, that's absolutely essential because of its lifeblood of the club, the community, and it might be the only thing that really probably is a known fact is the environment and the opportunity for players and children and people to develop in, because we're all born the same. Effectively, we're not, would say we were genetically superior because you're from this part of the world or this country or this generation. It's very much working with what you have, and as I mentioned earlier regarding the players per capita and children playing the game and people playing, then actually it's setting the environments and the opportunities and the exposure to allow them to flourish. So for me, it would be very much around that. Now, if I was able to, and I don't know if this is the case, if I have colleagues here and contacts here in terms of coaches or links to players, but that could, that would probably be able to, would play in the first team. But again, that's not my call. I would only support and advise, but primarily 99.999% is about developing what you have, because that's part of obviously a remit as a youth coach, as a developer, is that's what you do. And if there's ways to develop those ideas from bringing other expertise in within constraints, then obviously that would support that too. But like I said, primarily, absolutely is about what you have and how can you develop it. And I've heard some really positive things around the people in the club, the coaches and the players, that there is some real, a real openness and enthusiasm to improve, and there's some good talent at the club from what I've been informed. And when you're talking about players that are at the club that are getting up in the morning at 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning to train in the morning before going to school, that's a huge commitment. And then training in the evening and training, 2 or 3 times a week and playing at the weekends, that shows that football is huge and so important to people, that I only want to try and develop that and nourish that, and hopefully support them in maybe even getting, even pushing even more within reason, but maximising the best opportunity they can, whether that's at Vestur, whether that's at another club in the Faroe Islands, whether that's national team, whether that's internationally, because then people will soon start taking notice. And from what I gather, there are some players within the club that have started gaining international recognition.
Do you or will you use Football Manager to help scouting?
Well, I won't be so scouting. That might be a big conversation for my colleague Magnus. But I'm sure he's well connected. But as I said, if there's anything I can do to help with that, but it's a great game. I prefer the old Championship Manager, probably showing my age a bit. But it's like I said, the connections you have around the world now within gaming, within social media, is huge. And I think I was told a few years ago when working for the FA that you're normally around no more than 3 calls away potentially from anyone in the world, and that was before social media has exasperated to the phenomenon that it is now. So in terms of the network, I think football and the world is a lot smaller than you think.
And one final question from me: how excited are you to get going?
It's very, like I said, it's very much sorting things out here, which isn't been easy, with some challenges along the way. But I'm excited to get started. I'm looking forward to travelling on the 28th. So not long to go now, and the weeks and days just seem to fly by. So before I know it, I'll be flying out from the UK into Copenhagen, and then into Avaga, I think it's called. So I'm looking forward to meeting the people, seeing hopefully the effect I can have, and I'm sure it's not going to be plain sailing, but as the saying goes, a skilled sailor was never made at a calm sea.
I hope you enjoyed the interview. Thank you once again to Matt for coming on. Very much appreciated. I hope to speak to him again. He's really up for the job, he's really enthusiastic about it, and he can't wait to get going. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you back here next time.